Queer theory, which is the cousin of critical race theory. These are all birth of critical theories. Queer theory started in the 1980s. And go and read, especially my media in the room. Go read what I'm telling you because it's there. Okay? What they said is that the only purpose of queer theory is to attack the normal. And they explicitly target children with that because the younger they are, the more likely they are to adopt it.
Mark, like I said, Mark spoke at the symposium that we did back in April, and he was amazing. Everybody was so pleased, and they're like, when can we get him back? And so he graciously agreed to come over. You're from the Norman area, aren't you? So he came all the way over from the Norman area, and so he's going to stay the night, and that's why we're going to be able to have lunch with him tomorrow. And, when there's so much going on, and we wonder where it gets started and how it gets started and how do we get to it and how do we not know anything about it. And I think Mark has kind of peeled back a lot of that, and he knows he understands, and he wants to share it with us. He's a great asset to grassroots. He's a great asset to Oklahoma education, and I would ask that you join me in welcoming Mark Ousley. UnWokable.
Oh, no, I'm okay.
Sure. Well, if you do, just holler.
Okay, I will. Oh, goodness. Hey, thank you all so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. To call me somebody that is important enough to come and speak in front of you is not something I'm used to. It was a joy to come and speak to you the first time, and I was not used to being on camera like that, to be honest. I'm a teacher. Or at least I want to be. And I never wanted to be doing what I'm doing. And I feel that I've been led to do this in sometimes detriment to myself and detriment to what I would like to be doing because I believe I was put here for such a time as this. And that is not to say that I'm anyone important, because I'm absolutely not. I stand before you a perfectly imperfect person. I didn't want to put up a outline of what I was doing today because I want to talk to you from my heart a little bit. And I'm going to give you some details about things I'm seeing. I'm going to give you some things I think you need to look for. But I also just want to give you a message that we have to fight, or we have to contest the ideas that are being planted into the minds of our children, not just with equal intensity, but also with what we're fighting lacks, okay? Wokeness is a religion without grace. It operates out of fear. It at once makes people pay for having standards while not holding the people that subscribe to it to the standards, right? And this is a great intro music. That's good. That's fine. And it does this in many ways. It does this in many ways. The way you see it most is in the media. As I was driving up here, and I was thinking of ways that I could articulate this to you, I think that as I am a Christian, and in that I must acknowledge my imperfection. It's required of me. I think oftentimes, and here's one of my perfections, I just want to point this out, I'm a registered independent. So I know I'm speaking to a group of Republicans. And I will say this, I am a registered conservative independent, but I am an independent nonetheless. And the reason for that is because I don't have any loyalty to a party. I have no loyalty to a candidate. I have no loyalty to anything but the truth as I see it. But within that truth comes the need for pointing out things that we have to work on as a group, I think, to fight this. And as I was mentioning before, often what is weaponized against people who do want to fight this is the standards that we often hold or try to hold, and none of us actually live up to, right? Not all the time. Some of us have made bad mistakes. Some of us have made small mistakes, but all of us have made mistakes. And I bring this up in the context of teachers. Because as a teacher, I can tell you, it's hard to be a teacher. It's harder now than it has been in the past. And that's for a myriad of reasons. But this critical social justice message is one of the worst parts of being a teacher now. You're seeing a teacher shortage throughout the state. And it's not just because teachers aren't making enough money. Teachers don't make enough money. I don't believe that they do. But I can tell you as somebody who's never, when I was a kid, I wanted to be two things. Until I had an aunt who told me it was ridiculous and I could never do it, I wanted to be the President of the United States. Thank the Lord she told me not to do that. The second thing I wanted to be was a teacher. So I lowered my sights a little bit, or maybe I raised them, I don't know. But as a teacher, nobody goes into it to make money. As a teacher, you go into it to be able to affect the lives of children and students, even as I think as a college professor, right? Even that far up in a positive way. And what I'm seeing now across the state is teachers being, in many cases, forced to embed something for which they do not believe. And I have a lot of respect for Ryan Walters. I just want to point that out. I talk to him often. The first time I met him and talked to him about critical race theory was in October of 2020. I met with him and the governor at a restaurant in Oklahoma City when nobody else was talking about this stuff. And I tried to warn them, and I said, this is going to be the biggest thing that you see in education over the next 2 to 4 years. And they listened. But we didn't see any direct action at the beginning. And then, you had people like Chris Rufo and James Lindsay come out and convince President Trump to ban it in the federal government, and we were off to the races, right? But I warned him and I said, this is something that we have to understand is based upon holding people accountable for standards for which the other side does not subscribe to. And that's specifically done through the media, and it's done by making examples out of people. Normal people and not so normal people. Famous people, not so famous people. Teachers at the local level, or politicians, or people that choose to speak out beyond that. And I will tell you this, my name, my moniker, UnWokable, was created out of fear. And I stood behind it because I'm not perfect, as none of us are. right? But I want to talk about that imperfection, or anybody's imperfection. That because wokeness is a religion, it operates as a religion without grace. It can weaponize conservatives and Christians against the very people who need to stand up. Because there are going to be teachers who have failed, who have taught critical race theory, who have embedded this in their classroom because that's what they were required to do, or maybe even because they believed it. They are going to be teachers who fail because they got caught up in the sexualization of America over the last 30 or 40 years. That's implanted to you over your phone, over your computer, over your television. There are going to be teachers who failed on a myriad of levels. There are going to be administrators and politicians. But I serve a God of grace. Grace with standards, obviously. So, my first message to you is that as you see teachers, because I think this is going to happen in Oklahoma now that 1775 is starting to move, because the way that this ideology is designed is to use teachers as human shields for the administrators that are doing it. It's designed to make them stand up to it at certain points when they can't take it anymore. And then you'll have people in the media search for them when they've stood up and find everything they can about them that might be wrong or anything they've done wrong. And so that not only those on the left end of the spectrum, right, will be going after them, but those on the right end of the spectrum will too, because we all want to live up to our standards. And we feel that our standards are under attack, right? So I would just ask you first and foremost, be a people of grace. Trust, but verify, but be a people of grace, because there are going to be lots and lots of us who have been fearful, that may not have no choice but to have stood up, and will need that from you. And I'm one of them. We're all one of them. So that's my first point. When I spoke to you last time, I ended with a phrase that I think is powerful and gets a point across, because as conservatives, we all believe in our Second Amendment, right? And I said to you, they don't need your guns if they have your children. And that is true. They don't need your guns if they have your children. Your children will, over a period of time, 180 days a year, 8 hours a day, sometimes more, your children are being influenced by teachers. That's more than they see you. It's more than they talk to you. And therefore, what's being taught in that classroom when it comes to politics, or it comes to what is considered the moral good, is really, really important. And over the last 30 or 40, 50 years, parents have become complacent about what's being taught. Many of them who have been worried about it, have just taken their kids out. Right? And I understand that impulse. My wife and I are having our first child very soon. Thank you. And I waited too long, I think. I'm almost 40. Don't tell anyone. But until that happened, until that life, I didn't understand the impulse, to be honest with you, to say I'm going to take my child and I'm going to protect them from something I don't believe is good for them, even though I've been a teacher, right? And I will say this. As a teacher, I called my students my kids. But they are not my kids. They are their parents' children.
That's right.
Right? They are their parents' children. And ultimately, that means that they have the say over what that child should be learning and what they should be exposed to. But I will say this. Your children are anti-fragile. What do I mean by that? We think that sometimes we think that if we drop them, they'll break. But I was taught as a young kid, you train your child in the way that they should go, and when they are old, they won't depart from it. Right? And what you teach them at home and what you're watching them being taught in school is very important. So they don't need your guns if they have your children. So how are they getting your children? What tools are they using to implant a mode of thought that might be actually destructive to them over time, that might lead them down the path of having my first point was talked about being weaponized against them? Because you have standards, right? Traditional standards. I have standards. We all have standards. But what wokeness is designed to do is to weaponize both ends of that. And so you've been hearing a lot about the books going into schools. In the libraries that have content that is not suitable for children. You've been hearing a lot about the most visible things, whether that's drag queen story hour or pornographic pictures or different things usually being attributed to teachers in the classroom. And I'm not saying that they don't have a responsibility. But I want you to know that that is just the tip of the iceberg here. And what do we all know about icebergs, right? What you see is not the most dangerous part. That's just the part you're supposed to see. That's the part that's supposed to take your attention. Because what will happen is you will have all of these things being taken care of because politicians are going to run on them. They already are. On both sides of the issue, right? They are running on them. And it's easy to run on those visible things. And in a state like Oklahoma, it's likely that these things will not stand, right? As they do in other states. But I want you, as red state voters, as conservative voters, to understand this, that when those things are taken away and they're not in front of your eyes, the most pernicious things about this ideology, unless we deal with the structure that houses it and incentivizes it, will not go away. And so I'm going to identify some of those things for you that you may not have thought about. In 2021, the state legislature passed a mental health bill. And here is a tricky part about woke ideology, is that it has a tendency to create a problem and then sell you the elixir for it. Like any snake oil salesman might, right? And it incentivizes politicians to fix the problem, red or blue or independent. It incentivizes that. And you get behind a bill like the mental health bill, without looking it all over, because who is not for your children having better mental health? Aren't you? Are you? Of course you are. But the problem, the devil is in the details, right? Yeah. The mental health bill every 2 years requires a survey. Now, this is an opt-out option, okay? But on the survey are questions about your child's substance abuse issues, about parents and family substance abuse issues, about suicide, about guns. Just recently, after the tragedy in Uvalde, the federal government passed red flag laws. And this goes to my statement that I left you with at the last meeting.
One of the best statements ever. I'm telling you.
They don't need your guns if they have your children, but let me tell you how they will take your guns from your children. These state tests are used for reporting for many different things. Now, they say they take the names off of them. They say that there's nothing that can identify your child.
Yeah, that's right. I don't believe it.
Well, you know, how much impetus do we have to trust the government and what they tell us? Even if it's true now, it may not be true 10 years from now, because we all get incrementally led down a way. Why on earth, in cases of mental health, would they need to ask your child whether or not they've carried a gun that week? In the context of, are you suicidal? Have you done drugs? What's your gender identity? Have you had sex? With who? How many times? Things like that. And it may not be that specific and that graphic yet, but it's all there generally. Where this is going to go over time, and I think sooner rather than later, is that, well, let me just say this first. All of these surveys are used for a specific purpose now. Who's heard of ARPA? ARPA, A-R-P-A, or block grants, given by the stimulus package passed by the Biden administration. You heard of that? Did you know that these grants, many of them are doled out by the CDC because it was COVID related, right? And these grants, okay, are incentivized by municipalities, state, local, to incentivize an ESG mode of operation. And so what is ESG? It stands for environmental, social, and governance. Okay, and this began in corporations, and you're seeing it now all throughout the state of Oklahoma. This is a big thing, believe it or not, in the oil industry. I think it started back with T. Boone Pickens and his move for the wind energy, because there's been a low carbon, we need to save the environment from the environment. And of course, that's morally virtuous, right? But as in all things, it's not what we think. But the environment is just one part of it. The S in ESG stands for social. And social explicitly means social justice, or critical social justice. And I'll get to what that means in the context here, but let me get back to these surveys. municipalities, cities, counties, your state, in order to maintain the ARPA and the block grants, have to provide the CDC with data quarterly, because the money doesn't come to you all at once. So if you get $6 million to build low-cost housing, which is one of the things that you can do with an ARPA grant, you'll get a portion of it after fulfilling or turning in a report. And with that, you must have data about your community's mental health. Your schools, okay, your schools and your state are taking these mental health surveys, these anonymous mental health surveys, and using them to get money from the federal government. And so they're reporting the data to the CDC, who's rolling out the grants. Anonymously, of course, right? And so they get this money, but then in the next quarter, to get the next series of money that they need to finish because social, right? Social justice, we need low-cost housing. And who's not for feeding and housing the homeless? We all are, right? Or we all should be. You're not a good person if you don't. But with the federal government comes strings. And it incentivizes things. I was raised that it's my job individually to do what I can for the poor. It's my job individually to do what I can for the homeless. It's not my job collectively. It's not my job to make someone else do that. Otherwise, where's the choice, right? But they use these surveys, data taken from your children, given to the CDC to get their grants, swearing to you that these grants are anonymous, or these surveys are anonymous. And this is done through your state health and human services areas. Now think about that in the context of your red flag laws. Does anybody know what's involved in the red flag law that came out? Huh? Feel free to, it's an open classroom. So you can report somebody if they have mental issues, right? And this was designed out of the Uvalde issue, which again, who doesn't want to protect kids in school from having them shot? Of course you do. Who doesn't fear that happening to their own child or grandchild, or niece or nephew? All of us do. And this is the fix. And you had 15 retiring Republicans sign on to it.
Yeah.
20 years, your kids who are 5, how many surveys, if they take one every 2 years, are they going to take from the time that they're in pre-K? Lord knows if it'll go that low, but it's already in elementary schools. So they're answering bubbled surveys over things they may not understand. Right? And they're giving information to the government that may not be altogether correct, because I will tell you this, I've taught a lot of kids, and most of them, even through high school, don't give a crap about a bubbled survey. They will just get it done. And even though the parents who remove that opt out of it are few and far between. So a majority of the students take these surveys. And the administrators, here's the other part of it. The administrators are incentivized to make them take them. Why? Money. It's a monetization of the information coming from your children that may not be correct. And I would say, actually, given the quality of the answers coming from the minds of young people, is probably mostly not correct. If you're doing a quantitative study, you rely not that much on bubbled answers from kids who may not understand completely what they're reading. Especially now that reading is not necessarily the main focus of school anymore. And all of this is going to the CDC. Through the red flag laws, if you report somebody, they're going to have to justify it to take a gun away from somebody. How are they going to do that? There's going to be an evaluation of that person individually, but there will also be an evaluation of them going backwards, and it's going to be through state and federal agencies that do that. And so there is a very real risk here, ladies and gentlemen, that the health surveys that are being handed out to your kids in 20 or 30 years, or even sooner than that, will be used to take their guns from them, whether they deserve to be taken or not. All done through the S in ESG, social justice. All done to get money to build roads and bridges. All justified through COVID, right? All this money came from COVID, which they just put out today, new standards for unvaccinated people that said that they are the exact same as a vaccinated person.
Imagine that.
Fancy that.
That's from NPR. So if there's any media in the room, make sure that you put that in there. Oh, I know. I'll tell you, I was at the beginning of COVID, I was just as worried as anyone else. And it wasn't people getting sick or not getting sick that turned me, because there were people getting sick, right? It was seeing how it was being extended and used in exactly this kind of way to justify a systemic overreach, systemic overreach. To get your kids not today, but 20 years from today. To take from them liberties that they won't even know to look for, because the further they get from you, the less they remember. And that brings me to my next point. I am as vehemently, quote, anti-racist as they come. I have been a nerd from a young age, and one of my favorite things to read was Martin Luther King. Malcolm X was my favorite movie with Denzel Washington. I know that sounds weird, but it was. It was my favorite movie because I love that history. I love that time. John Kennedy is why I wanted to be president, because his name was John, and he looked like me, and he had there was an assassination and all these things, but it was also because of the things he did for people, because he was one of the first people, one of the first presidents to stand up for African Americans in this country in a public way. He was. And that's what got me in, honestly, what got me into understanding critical race theory from a very early point was because I think I've read every word that Martin Luther King ever wrote. I've watched all the documentaries. I've delved deep inside of what he thought theologically. And I want to say this to you, something that he said He said, we all have and judge worth of a human being based upon the fact that they were made by God. This is Martin Luther King, okay? And he says, when we look at that as being the dividing point, or the deciding point, this is quote, he says, terms like whiteness and blackness pass away, and brother and sister take their place. You hear a lot about whiteness and the evils of whiteness and the supposed virtues of blackness. I would say that neither have a point in determining a human's individual worth. What they are political terms. Larry Elder, who ran for governor of California, was called the black face of white supremacy. Nicole Hannah-Jones, the writer of the 1619 Project, said that a black skin doesn't necessarily denote a black voice. So what does that define? The black voice means a political voice going in a certain direction. That direction is towards a cultural Marxism. This is verified. If you want to read, there is an essay called The Property of Whiteness, or Whiteness as Property. It's written by a critical race theorist and directly makes the link of that someone's political whiteness gives them property in society that places them above those who don't have a political whiteness. What is that? It's Marxism. That is the definition when you're talking about the proletariat or the working class against an above class, right? The bourgeois against the elite. All they've done is take identity and make it property. That's all they've done. And then they said, okay, this is the only grace you can have if you have the wrong identity. You have to adopt this political philosophy. That's why you can have white people, skinned people, screaming at black people in public places, calling them racist, because that black person may not adopt the woke vision of what things are. That's why they could call Larry Elder the black face of white supremacy. That's why. Because he doesn't have the black voice. And I'm quoting Nicole Hannah-Jones. He's not black. It's not about identity. Queer theory, which is the cousin of critical race theory. These are all bird of critical theories. Queer theory started in the 1980s. And go and read, especially my media in the room. Go read what I'm telling you because it's there. Okay? What they said is the only purpose of queer theory is to attack the normal. And I often hear Democrats on the left side of the issue say things, Republicans and conservatives and Donald Trump and anyone they don't like at the moment are attacking our norms. They're attacking our blessed norms. They're attacking democracy. They're attacking our norms. They're attacking our norms. Over. Who's heard that in the media? Oftentimes, it's a Marxist trope. It's a way of operation to accuse your enemy of that of which you are doing. And I can trace this back academically. Queer theory is an attack on the normal. It's designed to break down norms of identity. And they explicitly target children with that, because the younger they are, the more likely they are to adopt it. And this is where you will hear lots about social emotional learning. I'm going to tell you right now, I was a very poor kid. I had an abusive father. He was an addict. He was a drunk. When he wasn't, he was great. He was really smart. Took me to church. Taught me to play the drums. But I was never not poor. I was always poor. I was the smelly kid in class. I'm the first person in my family to graduate high school, the first to go to college, or even attempt a graduate degree. And I'm not saying this to say, oh, woe for me. My siblings who just went to work make more money than I do. But I truly believe that I'm here for a reason. Because I've seen things that cause me great concern in this realm. When you attack the norms of a child at a young age, we always hear of nature versus nurture, right? You can move them in a certain direction. You can teach them to think something is virtuous or not. Jim Crow South, slavery time, it was taught to children to be racist. You ever heard the term that someone is not born racist, they were taught racism?
Yes.
Right. Because as I've taught kids, I've taught everything from pre-K through college. Little children don't notice those things. They don't care. They care more about the truck that's in the middle of the room that they want to go play with than they care about how anybody looks about anything. They don't care what you might want to identify as when you're old enough to actually know what that means. They just want to be around each other. They just want to play. They just want to have fun. Sometimes they want to fight. But they just want to be kids. The largest development time in a child's existence is from 0 to 4. The second is from 10 to 14. I taught middle school for a while, and I jokingly used to say that middle school boys and girls, 7th grade middle school boys and girls are not human beings. And I don't mean that literally, they are human beings. But they are changing at such a rapid pace, and both physically and mentally. The synapses in the brain, their hormones, teaching something where you have to have a kid sitting there, especially a boy at that age, is almost painful for them to have to sit still because their bones are growing in real time. I once had a kid, awesome kid. He was a 6th grader, and he came up to me one, he was talking like this, and I'm not joking with you. In 24 hours, came up to me the next day and was like, "Hey, Mr. Ousley, how are you doing?" Whoa, what? That rapid change is a kind of akin to what just happened to our country over the last 3 years, right? We often see now all the phones in the hands of kids, computers, everything is electronic. Social emotional learning is not something that you need to be worried about explicitly. It's something that is embedded in everything your kids do, in every piece of technology they touch. Google, who thinks, I love Governor Stitt, but signed a contract with Google to house your data, and it worked with schools. Google, when you work on Google Docs, will now change the language being typed. You know, you'd have spell correct, right? Well, now it will actually change the word in many cases to have more inclusive language. Now, the three words diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, I don't want to get there yet. I'll explain inclusion in a second. Let me finish my point. All of these kids change so fast at this age, 10 to 14, that, and I can attest to this, it's the reason why I became a teacher was because I was 13 and 14. I had a teacher that came to me when I was running around doing bad things, running with the wrong people, drinking, because nobody watched me. My parents were opioid addicts, living off of the government. And by the time I was 13, 14, I was the second family. I have a sister that's 10 years older than me and a brother that's 7 years older than me. So things kind of went south in that 7-year span in between us. But they had stopped working because they figured out that they could not do anything and actually pay for my insurance and my dental work and my glasses and my appendix coming out and all of those things without having to do any of that. And I'm thankful for that because Lord knows I don't know where I'd be if I didn't have it. But it incentivized my parents not to do anything over the course of time and to become more reliant on drugs. And they were very talented people. They did not graduate high school. My mother didn't even graduate middle school. But she was super smart. She would do other people's taxes. But it was a teacher that came to me and said, you can do this. When I walked into his classroom, he said, you can actually do this. You have some talent. You can do this. And I'd never thought about that before. I didn't even realize, I can be a teacher. I can teach music. I can do this. I can do that. Right? And he said, yeah. And he kicked me in the butt and he said, stop not doing it. And all of my grades got better. Not because I'm smart, because I'm not. But because I had something to work for and work toward. I had something to look at, and I had an example. The strongest force on the planet is peer pressure. You get that from your peers, but you get that from your teachers. If a young girl has bulimia, they've proven this in studies. If a young girl has bulimia, it's a horrible thing to suffer with. It comes from something that you deal with your identity. You don't want to be fat, right? You don't want to be heavy. You want to be pretty. And boys don't suffer from this most of the time. It's a difference. There's a difference, right? They've found that if especially in middle school, so we're talking 11 to 14, that if one girl has it, it will spread. And the kids in her immediate circle, the girls in her friend group, will all of a sudden have bulimia. Not all of them, of course, but they've proved that there is a social aspect to that. Queer theory is an attack on the normal by their own stated academics. And they pejorativize, they demonize the normal. Are you a cisgendered white male? They use what's called intersectionality to say, to flip a hierarchy in the minds of kids. In the minds of kids, they say, oh, because you were an oppressor before, and what does it take to be a historical oppressor? You come from a European white background. You're a male. Or you're a female who comes from a European white background. Or you're a person of color, as they would say, but you're affluent. And your parents are Republicans. I'm not joking. And then they rank them. They rank them on what Kimberly Crenshaw referred to as intersectionality. And this is the one time I wish I would have brought something, but they have a line that's here, and it goes straight across, and then they have lines that go up, and lines that go down. And down here are things, identities like being black, or being Asian, or being trans, or being something other than straight, white, rich, or just not even just affluent, or just not in poverty. And then at the other end are all the others. And what they did is they've inverted the axis. And they said to your kids in the classroom, at 10, especially at 10 to 14, they've said, if you lie in one of these historically oppressive categories, the only grace you will get is if you leave them. And so if you incentivize children, I know it's funny. The media. But if you leave the norm, if you adopt the innate Marxism, you can now attain a higher social status or grace for your historical sins that you had nothing to do with if you adopt this. Tell that to a 14-year-old girl. Tell that to me when I was 14. Tell that to a person of color when they're 14, whose parents might be Larry Elder. Because I will tell you this also. Nobody gets persecuted by the woke harder than people of color who do not agree, than black people or Asian people. I've seen them, horrible things said about them. Look at Clarence Thomas. Because they don't have the black voice. The black voice is a political voice. That's the tithe in the woke religion. They tithe at the ballot box. Anti-racism, as I told you the last time I talked to you, Ibram X. Kendi, X stands for Marxist, by the way. It does. That's why Latinx, it's just a Latino person who's a Marxist. And most Latino people do not like that term. You see it on every poll. They don't like the term, but when people self-identify that way, it means I've adopted the black voice, or I've adopted the Marxist voice, or I've adopted the critical theory voice, which is a political stance. And anti-racism, as defined by Ibram Kendi, he explicitly defines it in the context of public policy and institutional policy. That's what he defines it as. He says, in order to be anti-racist, you have to support leaders and policies that lead to the creation of equity where there is inequity between disparate groups, right? How do you do that? He gives you one mechanism. The only mechanism is discrimination. That's what he says. The only remedy for racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. It's just going the other way. And that's all done through policy. It's all done through public policy. And so you have to, the way that's being focused now is in hiring. That's where DEI comes in. Diversity, equity, and inclusion sound very good. Who doesn't want diversity? Of course you do. I do. My dad was a pastor at an African American church before he fell off later in life. And I spent my young childhood, much of it, learning the music and how to do that. And I didn't even cross my mind what color they were. I didn't care because I just loved the music and I loved them and he loved them and they all loved each other. And this is at a certain point when, this is not in a blue, this is in Center, Missouri, where you have racist people. There are racist people, okay, that don't like people because of the color of their skin. But that is not a majority of Americans. And that's not funny. But diversity has been weaponized because they want to create a system where they can homogenize or make thought the same across the board. Right? They want to instill the critical voice in the institution and have that institution, through public policy, promote that outward. So when you talk about universities, you talk about inclusion. Critical race theory devolved from critical legal studies. Okay? Critical legal studies came from Kimberly Crenshaw and Derek Bell. These are the actual people. Was a way of looking at the law and parsing it out using language to make up for some of the inequities in society and in law. Okay, fine. But the word inclusion has a specific legal definition according to the Supreme Court. And what it says is the doctrine of inclusion means that when you say the word include, it automatically means to exclude something else. Explicitly. It means to exclude. So if you're including one thing, you have to be excluding something else. Now, this is why critical race theorists don't like merit. I have never been someone who would be at the head of any class. I'm not. I went, my GPA would, I'm not somebody that's, but I worked hard and I made it through where I made it. But it has nothing to do with the way I look. I'm a cisgendered white male. But I'm just not as intelligent as a lot of my, as a lot of the people I went to school with. It's just a fact of the matter. But I still worked hard and I made something of myself. But I don't hold anything against anybody who did better than me. And many of them were not cisgender white males. Right? And I'm using their terms, right? The straight white males, whatever you want to say. But inclusion means to exclude something else, and in the concept of DEI, it means to do it through public policy, through anti-racist policies. And now, what they have you do is, if you're applying for jobs, they have you write a DEI statement that makes sure that if you go and apply for a job, especially at a university, they will make you write the statement, and if they will weed you out before they ever call you in for an interview. And there are actually studies being done right now that are going to provide the quantitative data for that by a gentleman named Wilford Riley, an African-American person out of Kentucky State University. He teaches at a historically black college. But it's why they wanted to remove the double-blind audition from the New York Philharmonic. And it wasn't because there were too many white people getting into the orchestras, because there are too many Asian people getting in the orchestra. It wasn't balanced. Why? Because a double-blind audition means that you play the music behind a screen, and the judges of the music say, this person played it better and this person didn't. And they would say, well, what about the people that didn't have the opportunity? I didn't. It had nothing to do with the color of my skin. And then there are lots of people who didn't have the opportunity that maybe came from the South Pacific or China or whatever, that were way more disadvantaged at a young age than someone who came from America, right? But they worked their tails off and they can play the violin better than anybody else. And so they're first chair of the New York Philharmonic. It has nothing to do with the way they look. All of this is designed to implant a political ideology on a campus or in an institution. And it's designed to remove people who don't agree with it. And it's not just outward, and this is where the media gets into it, right? Because they will. They'll sit there and laugh at you when you talk about this. It's so funny. But they will pick people to make examples of, so that the institution doesn't have to take the risk to discriminate against them outwardly. This is not a new thing, okay? Guess what? Christians did this too, right? At a certain point. That's why I started with repentance must come restoration. If not, you're going to lose, because you're going to lose on both sides. Just know that. Because they don't carry the way. They don't have the same standards as you. They will hold you accountable for not holding their standards and for holding yours and not living up to them. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's a Kafka trap. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And it will keep people from standing up to it. It will keep your teachers, who a majority of them, I'm telling you, I've been in the schools, I've listened, I don't agree with this in practice. There are some who do. But in a place like Oklahoma, the majority of them do not. But there are administrators being sent to them by the DEI offices at your universities, being implanted by your OU and your OSU Board of Regents, and your OU and your OSU presidents, in order to make money through ESG investments and to get the football teams into the SEC. They're selling you down the river. They're mortgaging the minds of your children on the back of the almighty dollar. That's literally what's happening. Because the pendulum swings. Right? The pendulum swings. Well, this is not, Marxism is designed to break your pendulum. It turns it into a ratchet. And I was told I have until 8:15. Is that correct?
Yes, you can listen. You can
Okay. I just looked down and it's, wow, I talked way too long. It took me a long time to say anything. Because I'm not perfect. It took me a long time to say anything because I was scared, because I want to be able to support my child and my wife. But we are running out of time. We're running out of time because there are forces beyond our control in places you're not even going to look at between now and the elections. People that you trust that are in power that don't really have your best interests, whether you think they do or not, regardless of which letter's in front of their name. My friend James Lindsay said, you got to have discernment. He's an atheist, okay? Just want to point that out. But he says he's an atheist that fought against Christianity. But here's the thing. When he came out and he said, I was wrong. We need these kinds of values because they're the ones that lead to a better society, regardless of the faith behind it. Because the other is designed to demonize us against each other. Marxism is designed to demonize because there's no grace there. The only grace you get is if you live up to the political ideology, then you will get all that you need for as long as you need, until it becomes politically expedient for you not to have it anymore. Because Marxism and this whole movement, they don't care about black people. They don't care about Asian people or trans people or gay people or lesbian people. They're all tools to an ideology. Some of them are true believers and really believe they are doing the right thing. But they do, the overarching powers behind it do not care about these people. They don't care about whether you're poor and white or poor and black or whatever. They just want you to tithe to the ballot box. That's all they want. To get the people in power, to put the policies that they want, to get the power that they want for as long as they can. They don't need your guns if they have your children, because they're going to make your children think it's morally superior to do what it is that they want you to do. It works both ways. Virtues work both ways. The strongest force on the planet is peer pressure. And if you make one child think that they need to chemically alter their body, that's something that can be reversed. And if you affirm that with care and say, well, I love you no matter what. If your 8-year-old came to you and wanted a full back tattoo of, say, Donald Trump on his back, because he loves Donald Trump so much and will always love Donald Trump forever, would you allow your child to do that? Why not? It's Donald. Don't you like Donald Trump? No, you do. You like Donald Trump. No, you would not do that, because the child does not have the capacity to tell you what they want long term. This is common sense. Right. When a child is 18 years old, they can decide what they want. My father and mother used to tell me, well, as long as you're under my roof, do what you want. You can't do what you want. You do what I say, right? When you're 18, you go do you. They're not capable. And saying that they are and affirming that they are capable is not love. If a child runs up to a stove, and there's a boiling hot pot of water, and he reaches up to grab the hot pot of water, you have a choice in the moment. You can affirm that decision and let the child grab the water and pour it all over themselves. Or you can smack their hand and teach them a quick, painful lesson and say, this is not comfortable, but if you grab that, you're going to hurt. And I'm not saying beat your children. It's not what I'm saying. Got that? Good? Okay. So,
You might want to clarify.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. What I'm saying is I'm trying to illustrate something that sometimes short pain if you require perfect warriors to win the war, you've already lost.
That's right.
Extend, over the next 2 years, extend the grace to the teachers and the people that are going through this, because there's a lot of people waking up. Use discernment. We cannot win this by being what they want us to be. They want to make you look like you're insane. Yes. The media wants to make you look like you're insane. Don't be insane. Don't. Don't do stupid things, but don't hold people to insane standards either. Hold your standards, but realize that we are a people of grace. Your kids will appreciate that from you, and you will eventually too. Thank you.
All right, real quick. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me clear the air real quick. We do have some fake news in the room. Sarah Gray, why don't you stand up and say hello? All right. And, well, you on your blog, I don't know, you said that you're part of the media on Twitter. And this is Larry Williamson. This is not Bob Jack. So, once again, you're putting out fake news. So she's got it on her Twitter feed. She seems to show up whenever we have special events like Scott Pressler. And so she's here, and she's the one that's over there laughing while everything's going on, and her little friend. And there's no H in Rhonda. Let me just say that. There's no H in Rhonda. So everybody welcome Sarah Gray. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. We love everybody attending. So we will,
No, my Twitter handle is not Sarah.
That's right, it's @not Sarah Gray. That's right. So, just wanted to make everybody aware because I believe it's important that we know, right? So, I want to thank everybody for coming out. Does anybody have any questions that you might want to ask Mark, or would you like to join us tomorrow? Everybody's welcome, including you, to join us tomorrow at 11:45 at the Embassy, 7100 East 31st Street. We're going to meet for lunch, and we'll have conversation. So it won't cost you anything. If you want to make a donation to help cover the cost, that's fine. But you come on over because I want everyone that wants to have this opportunity to do so. So Daryl, I did want to mention Daryl. Daryl's got his books back there. If you're not familiar with Daryl, he's got a daily show in the morning. And I had a great time on your program the other day. That was good. That was a lot of fun. And he's with Project 46, which you guys have heard me talk about before. It is a come tell us about it, Daryl. You can, but you're going to have to speak in here so we get it on the video.
All right. A few years ago, some fellow veterans of mine and friends of mine and I noticed that there was a dedicated bent to keeping you people stupid by presenting you with lies and propaganda. That's something I know a lot about after spending my entire adult life working in the intelligence community. And so we came out of retirement, we bought the surviving assets of a studio, and we have been building from the ground up the only truly local media outlet in this state. Even some of the other outlets that claim to be local get their news feed dropped into their inbox from controlling voices and networks in New York, et cetera, et cetera. So we've built Project 46 Media, 46 for the state of Oklahoma, the 46th State of the Union, not anything to do with any lines of succession. And so I'm an academic. I'm a truth seeker who has spent my entire adult life asking hard questions and often coming up with uncomfortable truths in order to answer them. So all we do is we get to the bottom of the issues. We talk about what's going on in the world around us. We talk about what's going on in our lives, in your life, and why the things that people are trying to distract you with may or may not matter. I try to encourage my audience to keep a local attention span because all politics are personal. Politics are just your principles, your philosophies put into motion, put into play. It's where I can really see what's important to you. Is what are you spending your time on? What are you spending your money on? That's your politics. Everybody has politics, and that's okay. You just need to understand that sometimes the things that you do have first, second, third order effects. So we try to help you be a little bit more informed in your decision making and try to present to you things that may or may not be on your radar. So the other thing I do, since Rhonda made the mistake of handing me a microphone and I'm not going to give it back, is I write books. I remember I was in a literature class at a university here and made the comment, this book sucks, I could do better than this. And to her credit, my professor looked at me in the eye and dared me to do exactly that. And so I did. And then before I graduated, she dared me again. She said, if you had a horn, then you'd put your own name on it instead of writing under a pseudonym. So I did. And so, I've got a couple of leftover copies from my last signing. If you guys want to get in on it, the premiere book, Oathkeeper, is a bestseller, but I'm out of copies, sorry. So if you don't have the first one in the series, it makes more sense if you read the first one. But more lighthearted, After the West is just a good two-fisted Saturday afternoon matinee Western set 1,000 years in the future. And you'll notice that I have the Legos up here. One of the things I do as a writer, and I throw them in the podcast as well, is when I'm stuck on something, oftentimes I'll build the scene out of Legos. And it stays in front of my writing chair until I'm done. And then sometimes they survive even after that, so that I can take them out at promotional events and things like that. Well, while Rhonda was on the show the other day, she wanted to know if there was a Rhonda Villamont Smith Lego figure somewhere in the studio. So now you can see over here, I think you can tell which one is Donald Trump and which one is Rhonda. But feel free to come over and take a look at that and just see. I'm happy to talk. I'm happy to meet people. I live in a shack in the woods, so this is a chance for me to see adults. Thanks for letting me come out.
Thank you. Also, if anyone's interested in taking any type of shooting classes, Daryl gives great shooting classes, and I must say that my groupings are doing quite well, thank you. So thank you so much for coming out. We'll be back here again next month. We're probably going to try and bring Julianne Romanello back again. And so I don't know if we'll do it next month or the month after, but we're just trying to get you guys educated and give you as much information as we can. So you guys be safe, and don't forget to get out and vote on August 23rd. Thank you.